Tuberculosis, or TB, is a bacterial infection marked by Mycobacterium tuberculosis, and it mostly affects the lungs. While TB isn't yet eradicated in the United States, we have one of the lowest rates of TB disease in the world. Still, that doesn't mean that TB infection isn't a threat to your health, especially if you travel to other parts of the world where it's more prominent. In this video, learn whether or not TB disease is fully curable, how it's treated, what the recovery process looks like, and more. So, can TB disease be cured? Yes, TB disease is curable, but catching and treating it quickly is vital. Now, one thing that makes treating TB so tricky is that the infection has different stages. You might have what's called latent TB infection, which means you don't display any symptoms and cannot spread TB. However, you're still infected with the bacteria and it can escalate into active TB disease. The World Health Organization says that if you develop active TB disease, the symptoms, which can include coughing, fever, and night sweats, might be so mild that you don't end up seeking care. However, you are contagious and can spread TB to others. Without treatment, up to two-thirds of people with tuberculosis will die. This is why, if you're experiencing any symptoms, you should see your healthcare provider immediately. So, how is a TB infection diagnosed? There are several different ways to diagnose TB disease. A simple blood test is the quickest way to determine if you have TB disease. The quantiferin TB Gold Plus test checks for exposure to TB. eNational testing will deliver the results of your TB test via email within 3 to 5 business days. The TB skin test is another widely used method to screen for TB exposure. However, it requires 2 visits to your provider within 2 to 3 days of each other, making it a less convenient option for some individuals. Because a positive result on this test does not distinguish between latent TB infection and active TB disease, further testing such as x-rays and sputum cultures is necessary, which brings us to the next method of diagnosing TB disease. The gold standard for diagnosing active TB disease is the sputum culture. By coughing deeply, you produce mucus called sputum, which is then tested for TB bacteria. While in some people the TB bacteria can be identified immediately, in others it can take a couple of months for the Mycobacterium tuberculosis organism to grow in the sample. In some cases, a CT scan or bronchoscopy might be necessary to determine if you have active TB disease, although these are less common than the sputum culture. Now, what does TB treatment look like? For a latent TB infection, you'll likely need to take drugs prescribed by your provider for 3 to 4 months. This will especially be the case if you have a disease like HIV or AIDS that increases the risk of your latent TB infection turning into an active TB disease. Treatment for an active TB disease can take up to 9 months. If you've developed drug-resistant tuberculosis, you may be prescribed even stronger medications that are capable of killing the disease. While drug-resistant TB is more complex, it's still treatable. It's crucial that you take all of your TB medicine prescribed exactly as you were prescribed them by your healthcare provider. Failing to do so could mean that the TB germs in your body aren't killed. Any misuse of drugs for your TB infection could also lead to the development of drug-resistant bacteria in your body. Generally, there are 2 treatment options. You might be sent home with the drugs, which you take on your own, or you might be required to undergo directly observed therapy, or DOT, which means you are monitored while taking the medication to ensure you do so properly. So, can you prevent TB disease? Well, you might have heard this saying before: prevention is better than a cure. So, can TB disease be prevented? Yes, with the Bacille Calmette-Guerin, or the BCG vaccine, although it's not widely used in the United States, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Rather, it's more commonly administered to infants and children in other countries where TB disease is more common. Like many vaccines, the protection you receive from the TB vaccine weakens over time. If you receive this vaccine, be sure to let your healthcare provider know before you get tested for TB disease, as the vaccine can cause a false positive with the TB skin test. Blood tests, however, are not impacted by the vaccine, making them a more reliable method for diagnosis. If you have plans to travel internationally in the near future, be sure to speak with a travel medicine specialist well in advance. Depending on your destination, they might recommend specific precautions to protect you against getting infected with TB. In particular, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the Central African Republic, Namibia, and the Philippines have higher rates of TB. Starting treatment promptly is important to stop tuberculosis from progressing, protecting those around you, and avoiding any further health problems. If you think you might have been exposed, learn more about the QuantiFERON TB Gold Plus test or speak with a healthcare worker immediately about getting screened for TB disease and, if needed, getting treated to prevent the development of TB disease. eNational testing has more than 2,000 locations nationwide and offers same-day service. Find a testing center near you.